Chair of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, and I'm pleased to be serving today as your host. We wanted to again provide an update regarding the latest information available regarding business preservation, continuity, and recovery during the COVID-19 crisis. So much has happened in the past 7 weeks of this pandemic, and the governor is now working on reopening the state, reopening businesses, and restarting our economy. Our purpose is to provide current, reliable, and relevant information in the time that we have. And our goal is to provide clear and concise answers to questions that are of particular importance to our members of our business community. To everyone attending, thank you for what you are doing for your community, your companies, and your employees. I know that while we are dealing with novel COVID challenges, we also have to be focused on our core businesses. For example, at this time of year, FPL begins our drills in preparation for storm season, and we're already having to work through emergency response protocols during the existing state of emergency, both internally and with the county and city emergency operations centers that we serve in the event we have to serve remotely or maintain safe distancing during a storm. Imagine that. June 1st is storm season. Well, we have 4 great presenters today, 2 elected officials representing leadership in state and local government, a leader from the Memorial Healthcare System, and our school superintendent. We will be taking questions throughout the meeting. If you do have a question, please send it to us by way of the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom meeting screen, and we'll get to as many as we can. Again, use the chat icon at the bottom of your screen and we'll take questions there. With that, let's get right into the meeting. We are so pleased to have our first speaker with us today. He is helping lead us through this crisis on the national stage and has been a staunch advocate for small businesses and legislation addressing relief and recovery for our country. He has honorably served Florida in many ways since first being elected to the Florida House of Representatives in 2000 and then Speaker in 2006. He was then elected our U.S. Senator in 2010 and serves as chairman of the Senate Committee on Small Business and Entrepreneurship and as a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the very powerful Senate Appropriations Committee, for which we are most grateful, particularly in this pandemic. They, of course, are responsible for allocating funding at the federal government. It is my pleasure to introduce Senator Marco Rubio. Senator?
Thank you. Thanks for having me here today. A couple things. First of all, I apologize for the camera not working. It has nothing to do with the fact that I haven't cut my hair in 2 months. It's just I can't get this device. I got to figure it out. I'm using a separate device for Zoom. So, but I hope you can hear me well.
We can.
Great. I wanted to focus on something that's been in the media a lot at this point. I think most of you are aware of how the program works, the Paycheck Protection Program. So obviously this was a program that our goal in putting it together was to try to provide as many small and mid-sized businesses as possible the funding they would need to retain as much workforce as possible. This is particularly obviously in Florida a high priority for us because we knew that like every state, we would struggle to get people into the unemployment system. And you're seeing that happen. It's just overwhelming every state. And second, because so much of our economy is service sector dependent, particularly in the food services, which has suffered the brunt. I believe at last count, about over 60% of the unemployment claims in this country came out of the hospitality sector. And you can only imagine what that would mean for Florida and what it has meant to Florida. And so we were asked then, as we began to work on it, to expand it to include not just small businesses, but also the 501c3s that qualified and independent contractors. And so we realized you couldn't build there was no equivalent to the IRS sending you a check in the mail for small businesses and others. So we sort of understood we couldn't reinvent the wheel in a day. And we came up with a way of leveraging and building on the architecture of an existing program through the Small Business Administration called the 7A Loan Program. And by that architecture, we meant the same portal that they use that already existed, and beginning initially with the same 1,800 lenders that are delegated lenders and are able to make these loans through the 7A program because they understand the system. But we always knew as well that wouldn't be enough. We'd have to add. The bill passes on a Friday. Within 7 days, they have to write the rules and stand up the program. I think the rules literally came out Thursday night at 10:30 of that week, and on Friday, April 3rd, the program launched, and it had a series of glitches. You know, the E-Trans system that was used to access it didn't have the capacity to handle the enormous volume that hit it. As you can imagine, before that day, no lender in America had ever made one of these PPP loans. No one had ever applied for one, and the SBA had never processed them. I'm happy to say that over the 11 days that the program was in place, it improved every single day, especially after we took in about 200 comments and questions and complaints from lenders and were able to narrow that list down rapidly to the point where within 11 days, they made the equivalent of 14 years worth of SBA loans, 1.6 million. Now, the average loan is about $206,000. 74% of these loans were for $150,000 or less, which, because the loan amounts are based on 2.5 months of average payroll costs, we're talking about 74% of the loans were for companies that had $60,000 a month or less of payroll costs. And by the way, all that was despite the fact that the independent contractors couldn't even start applying until 7 days into this program. So it is my view that my prediction that the average loan number and that percentage under 150 is going to climb dramatically as more of them work their way in. And this was administered across 5,000 applicants. Now, there was $350 billion set aside in the appropriations process to fund the guarantees. Understand, the cash comes from the lender, not from the government. So this is not a direct government transfer, but that money is there and has to be reserved as a guarantee that that loan will either be paid to the lender if it becomes a forgivable loan, which it does if you spend it on payroll and rent and things of that nature, or if it becomes a loan and the lender and the borrower doesn't pay it, the federal government it's 100% guaranteed. So that money's guarantee money. Well, we hit that cap by Thursday of last week. The SBA had to close the portal off, and so we basically have, for the last 7 days, not processed any more of these PPP loans. In about an hour and a half or two, the U.S. House of Representatives should pass a bill that provides an additional $310 billion of guarantees for this program. $250 billion in the normal, regular overall budget, and then $60 billion on top of that, that would be reserved specifically to be used by lenders with $10 billion or less in assets, meaning small banks, regional banks, who have been real heroes in this, in terms of they represent about 70% of these loans that were made. So the good news is that that's going to come online. The good news is that you now have over 5,000 lenders who know how to do these. In fact, if you look at the last 48 hours of the loans last week, they were really picking up steam. The more of these you do, the better they get at doing it. And the good news is that it should, when it relaunches as early as tomorrow morning, it should work a lot better than when it was initially launched. There's more lenders, they know how to do them. And hopefully they've used the last 7 days, the SBA says, to increase the capacity of the E-Trans system. And they're sitting on about 1 million applications that have been filled out in the interim or right before. So again, they don't have, that's all very good news, because that means that it can move a lot quicker. The bad news, of course, is that we're going to hit that cap perhaps even faster than we did the last time. But I mean, and that's problematic, and that's a bridge we're going to have to cross. But it also means that it'll be a lot of people out there getting this assistance. I wanted to touch on 2 points before I answer any questions you have. The first is, I get a lot, these are two, they're very related. We hear from a lot of people that say, we applied and were approved and haven't gotten our money, or we applied and haven't heard back. On the we applied and approved but haven't gotten our money, if you are approved and you have an SBA loan, then what's holding you up is not that the fund ran out. The cash comes from your lenders. It comes from the bank or the credit union that you used. It comes out of their deposits. It's like what they have on hand. They use that to fund. The government money is a guarantee. So you're not waiting on the government money, you're waiting for your lender to disperse. They have 10 days from the date of approval to disperse, which means every single day now, everyone should be getting more and more disbursements. If you applied and haven't heard back, the likeliest reason why is the lapse, meaning you applied, but before they could submit it on your behalf, the SBA shut off the portal. So hopefully when it restarts here, your lender will be processing those quickly, and you should have an approval. And then once you get an approval, you are 10 days or less away from getting a distribution of the funds. There's been some news coverage about bigger companies. That was never the intent of this. I'm glad that Treasury issued some guidance. We've been working with them on it now for a week, that made the pretty clear that on the certification requirement, when you apply, you have to certify that you've been hurt by the crisis and you need this to fund operations. So they made pretty clear that before you sign that certification, you better make sure that is accurate. And it even cites as an example how large publicly traded companies with access to other means of liquidity would probably not be able to certify. And they gave all those companies up to the 7th of May to return. And I think you're actually starting to see some returns, many of them privately, obviously, but some will be disclosed eventually. So that's a good sign because it provides more funds for others. There's been some hay made about restaurants and hotel chains. I don't need to explain to this group that just because the sign outside says Marriott or Hyatt or Hilton, that corporation doesn't own the hotel. That could very well be an individual family or family business that runs it. Oftentimes it's people that once were managers at a hotel that were able to put together enough money to actually own a franchise. Many of them didn't qualify because hotels were excluded from the franchise list. Those are a key part of industry in our state. And the other is chain restaurants. And again, this was not for the chain restaurants that are corporate owned, but for chain restaurants that are franchise owned at the individual level by independent owners. They, know this, 60 some odd % of the unemployed people in this country come from the hospitality sector, primarily from food services. 46% of food service workers in America who work at full service restaurants work for a franchise or for a chain. So we just felt that it was very difficult to prevent mass unemployment if you are cutting off 46% of the workers in the most impacted industry in the country. So there's a balancing act there between corporate-owned companies that are publicly traded and have other access to liquidity, and the ones who are part of a network or a chain of, but that the owners at the ground level are independent owners. And there are many brands that are that way. So the goal here was to move quickly. The more requirements you put on the front end to apply, the harder it's going to be to process these loans, and the more disadvantaged small business. If you require that to get this, you have to have audited financial statements, gross receipts, and so forth. Many small businesses aren't even going to try. They don't keep those kinds of records. It would take them forever to put it together. Larger businesses might be able to move quickly on it. So the goal here was to sort of move the money at the front end on a certification, and then sort of verify on the back end on the forgiveness part of it, whether or not the people who got it should have been the ones who got it. So obviously it's an emergency effort, and I think it's going to get better and continue to improve, and it's going to help a lot of people. So that's the update on that.
Well, thank you so much, Senator. It was great to have the insight that you shared with regard to the funding of the larger restaurant chains. That was very helpful in our understanding. And you're right, it is a balancing act. But it cannot be overstated how meaningful your work has been to our business community. The Payment Protection Program has certainly been a godsend for our business community. So thank you for all of that. We have a few questions of you, and the first is, we understand that there is the relief package that the Senate passed on Monday, some just over $400 billion for small businesses and hospital relief and testing. How and when do you anticipate the House will adopt it?
Well, they're debating it as we speak. So the Senate was able to pass it unanimously. Our rules are different from the House. So because they had some members that were going to object, they have to have a quorum, meaning half the members have to come. So I think they've cobbled together enough members of Congress in driving distance that are there now. They're actually debating on the floor as we speak. I think their vote is going to be about 4:30. They're going to have to vote in 3 shifts so they can have some distancing, I suppose. And so I anticipate that by 5 p.m. tonight, it will be past 5:30, whatever time, however long it takes to close out that vote. And my understanding is the president will sign it this evening or tonight, but the SBA and the Treasury Department are operating under the idea that the funding will be in place and that they'll theoretically, I'm pushing very hard for this, that they'll be able to launch tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Eastern or 9 a.m. Eastern, depending on what time they can open up the SBA portal.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, we'll be following that closely. So we received, this is from a very concerned restaurant owner owning two of our very popular restaurants here in Fort Lauderdale, Valentina Cucina Italiana and Mondor East. They applied for an SBA EIDL loan 3 weeks ago, and has found that the SBA cannot tell them an estimated date when they will hear about their application. That fund apparently included a $10,000 grant that was to be deposited within 3 days of the application being received. However, that grant still has not been deposited. Do you have any insight on whether those grants are still being issued or why that might be?
Yeah, both of those funds ran out of money. This bill put another $60 billion in EIDL and another $10 billion in those emergency grants, the 72-hour ones. You know, the reason why we created PPP is because we knew that that program would not work. And the reason for this sort of situation, because that's designed for if a hurricane or a tornado hits a town and the SBA comes down and processes 1,000 loans. It's not designed for a national emergency. Nonetheless, it's an important piece of it and it will help some people. It just ran out of money. I think EIDL has about $300 billion worth of requests. And so now some of the people who applied before they knew PPP was an option, but
Right.
they just put another $60 billion in it. And so that should loosen up their ability to do some more of those. And you can have both, by the way. That's another point people need to realize. You can get an EIDL grant loan, you can get the emergency grant, and you can still apply for PPP. And ideally, the combination of the two, if you can get both, works real well, because one allows you the sort of working capital to pay suppliers and operate, and the other one allows you to pay a portion of your overhead, but primarily your workers. And in some industries, having to lay off a worker is really problematic because they're specialized and you can't just go out and hire anyone to replace them.
Okay, just one other clarifying point on that. Would this restaurateur have to reapply now that it's been refunded, or would that application still be viable?
No, you won't. No, it's the same program. There was just a pause in it. So you should not have to reapply. If you're talking about PPP, for both of them for that matter, the application isn't, if it's PPP, the application's in the hands of your lender. So it's just a question of the portal opening up and your lender then submitting it. And so, but you should not have to reapply.
All right, well, thank you for that. We really appreciate your thoughts and comments, Senator. I know that you may have to leave before the end of this, and we really appreciate your taking your time and sharing what you've been doing and answering these questions for us.
Yeah,
and
thank you for inviting me.
And on behalf of the Alliance, we ask you please continue to stay safe and be healthy.
Likewise to everyone on the call.
All right, thank you, Senator. So our next speaker is helping lead efforts here in Broward County in both his role as mayor of the city of Weston and chair of the Broward League of Cities. He is also a COVID survivor, so has a unique perspective. I am pleased to call on Mayor Dan Sturmer. Dan?
Good afternoon, Juliet. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you.
Good, and thank you to you and the Alliance for this opportunity to participate in this conversation, and it's an honor to follow Senator Rubio, who many of you will recall started his career as a locally elected official before he moved to the Florida House as Speaker, and now onto the Florida Senate. So thank you for everything you're doing, Senator Rubio. I did receive we all did receive an email from your staff this morning with the latest update on funding related issues. So thank you not only for continuing to help the business community, but for keeping the local governments informed about what's going on. And Juliet, I just wanted to sort of give everybody an overview and let everybody know that here at Broward, at least, the 31 cities are unified in where we believe we needed to get to and where we are now with regard to creating safer at home orders that were not easy nor pleasant to do, but were necessary to do. And we are and have continued to be in conversation with our county mayor, Mayor Holness. We were on a call earlier this week, and we have another call scheduled for tomorrow, because we've all started to look forward to where we go next. And while, and thank you for recognizing that I am one of the few electeds that tested positive. I've now tested negative. But we are looking towards where we go next with regard to determining what the new normal is. And I am one of those that advocates, don't look at the calendar. This virus doesn't look at where a municipal boundary is or a county boundary is. And certainly he or she or it doesn't care what the date on the calendar is. And we need to rely upon our health officials and our professionals to give us their guidance based upon what they're seeing. And based upon a call earlier this week, the 31 cities are unified that we need to reopen in a uniform fashion. We can't do it where it's city A does something and city B does something. We need to do it the right way, because we all recognize if there are 4 cities around each other and 3 of them do something and the 4th doesn't, everybody from those first 3 cities is going to run to that 4th city. So it's not helping us as a community. And I've been one of the advocates and continue to be of social distancing and the virtues of it. And I keep saying, while it's unfortunate, nobody wants it, it's a small price to pay, because at the end, your life could depend upon it. So we continue as mayors and other elected officials to dialogue daily, formally and informally, about where we are with regard to funding issues, county issues, reopening issues. What does one person have with regard to a good procedure that the rest of us may do? But we are also concerned about our small businesses and our large businesses and getting them back to work. We've all tried hard as local governments to enforce, eat locally, visit and get takeout from your local restaurants. They need it. It's what's keeping part of the local economy going, besides all of our supermarkets and pharmacies that are doing well. But one of the ways we can ensure that another part of the local economy is doing well is by visiting our local restaurants. They truly appreciate it. We've all been involved in a host of community events, and the restaurants are partnering with us to help families in need. But every elected official in Broward County is focused on this, is doing what we think is best for everyone, understanding not everyone agrees. But we are trying to look at the bigger community good, because once we all band together and figuratively hold hands 6 feet apart, we will get through this and come out the other side. And one of those is through the unpleasant things we needed to do of just telling people they needed to stay home. So every government is now generally meeting virtually. We figured out how to get public participation in local meetings. And it's just, most of our staffs are telecommuting and working remotely or in their vehicles. So we too are impacted by this. As most people know, local government budget season goes from October 1 to September 30th. So we're all in the middle of doing our budgets for next year and all trying to figure out what impact will this pandemic have on our budgets. So we are looking at those things as well, but local government continues to work every day. We've never closed. We are working collaboratively with county government and state government, as well as our partners on the national scene as well. So we've been in contact, working, in constant partnership with the superintendent and his team, the county administrator and her team, the governor and his team through Director Moskowitz, Department of Health through Dr. Thackey, and our federal representatives. They're in constant contact with us as well. So we are trying as the whole of government to get ready for what's coming next. Again, I'm not one of those that advocates we look at a calendar and circle a day. To me, it's not a date-driven concept. It's a health-conscious and right based on the numbers discussion we need to have. So Juliet, I'm here to answer whatever you may want to ask me.
Thank you so much, Mayor, for your leadership, not only of your city, but of course of the Broward League of Cities.
Thank you.
We're going to start with a more personal question before we ask about your expertise as it relates to the reopening of Broward cities. But as someone, we are so happy, first of all, to see you healthy.
Thank
I
you.
was heartened to hear that you would actually be participating today.
Thank you.
So just as some insight, as someone who has battled with the coronavirus and recovered, can you talk a little bit about your experience getting tested and with the disease itself?
Yeah, the testing, and I went through the Cleveland Clinic drive-through, and the nurse who, before she tested me, said, "This is going to be uncomfortable." And I had spoken with staff who told me it was going to be uncomfortable. I never realized how uncomfortable that actually is until you feel like there's a swab that's going to come out the back of your head. And once you react to it and they say, please don't cough, please don't sneeze, which your body does, and you recover, they then say, we now have to do the other side. And it is, but it's a necessary thing, and I get over it. And I'm one of the lucky ones. I was exhausted and slept for the better part of 5 days. I had headaches. I had severe eye pain. I have a cough that continues to be here today. It lingers and it's dry, and it's only when I'm upright. I had some sweats and fever at night, but nothing that woke me up. And I know others, and we've all seen stories of others who have had it much worse than me. So I keep saying, there but for the grace go I. And I'm also mindful of those who didn't make it and their families. And I've spoken with many who say, I feel this, what should I do? And I say, don't mess with this. Go call your doctor. You can't let this get ahead of you, because it can happen so quickly that it could be catastrophic. But thanks for asking.
Absolutely, and thanks for sharing. So you made a statement earlier, I think at the very beginning of your remarks, that, and it was music to our ears, all 31 cities are unified in their approach about opening all at once in a uniform fashion. That in and of itself, I would have to say, is tremendous progress and very good news. So how are Broward cities, planning to work together for reopening local businesses? Has there been the beginnings of any kind of cohesive plan?
There is ongoing conversation and planning being done. And we are one of a 4-county region. The leaders of Palm Beach County, Broward County, Miami-Dade County, and Monroe County are trying as a region to move in unison. Ms. Henry, on behalf of Broward County, has been the leader on those conversations. And we had a call earlier this week with the mayor and Ms. Henry, and they updated us on the Miami-Dade thinking. And the cities in a 10,000-foot view all agreed we want to do this in a uniform fashion. There are, and you've heard conversation rolling out of Miami-Dade County, that the first things that people are talking about, and it's discussed out there because it's been in the news, is passive parks, golf courses, and boating. And in some respects, those were the last things to be shut down, and so they're one of the easier, there are things that we can get our communities back doing, where if done the right way, will allow our communities to come back to life and allow for social distancing. That's where we're starting. But again, we've seen and had conversations, and like I said, we've got another conversation tomorrow with the mayor and the administrator. I communicate with Mayor Holness and County Administrator Henry on a daily or semi-daily basis. So the line of communication between the counties and the cities is open and free-flowing. If the county administrator has a concern, she's not bashful about telling me. And as the superintendent can tell you, I'm not bashful about expressing my opinion or that on behalf of the 31 cities. And you know that as well, Juliet. So
Yeah.
we all want to do this right, because our fear is if we get too far ahead of ourselves, trying to then roll that back will be so much more difficult. Trying to get the public to understand, we said, you can go outside, you can do this, and then if we don't do it the right way, we're sorry, you now have to go back in. That's a fear, and we all have that fear. So many of us are advocating being conservative and cautious about how we do this. And we are saying we'd rather actually take a little more time than rush this through and backslide. Because getting a spike is not in any of our interests, short-term or long-term. And we all know our residents and their families are getting cabin fever. So we're trying to do our best to balance all of these things, understanding everyone's health and safety is paramount.
Thank you for that. So we actually have an interesting question slash comment from one of the viewers. And that is that they were reading a book recently about the 1918 pandemic, and that during that period of time, they actually kept things hyper local. They divided cities and fairly much tried to keep individuals in those divided cities in their very local neighborhoods, as opposed to even going outside their neighborhoods. That was very interesting. Was that even contemplated? Is that even feasible in our more global world?
I'm not sure of the answer, and I was unaware of that. Depending on how each city is designed as well, I can speak for my city better than others, is we're a master plan community. And even if you broke up the city into hypothetically north, south, east, and west, you might not have the ability to have residents get to a Publix or another supermarket to get their groceries. So it's almost, it's not, sometimes maybe impractical. In the 1918s, it may have worked really well. But today, some cities are, geographically spread out. So if we started to do that, it could just create abilities for those residents who don't have something in their community that's the smaller part of the community to get to it, and how to go about doing that. One of the things we've also known here, and we're all sensitive, is to the HIPAA requirements and telling, I've been very vocal about my testing positive. Many questions are being asked of, can we know what HOA or what part of a community somebody who tested positive lives in? Or the latest question is, can somebody give us the mortality rates in our specific cities? Under HIPAA, there's a lot of stuff we can't do. And we don't even have the data. So we are trying our hardest to plan across our cities as if everyone next door to us may have it. And I think that's how everybody should be acting until we reduce the safer at home and other social distancing requirements.
Well, thank you for that. We've heard that Miami is thinking of opening parks and beaches very shortly. Is Broward, the Broward city's talking of, and we're talking about unified front regional approach. Is there any talk about Broward following suit?
The Miami-Dade conversation that I'm aware of is parks, boating, and golf courses. There are conversations about beaches taking place here. And I know the coastal cities have been talking amongst themselves as well. Some cities have public beach, some people don't. So it's a question of how that's going to happen. We all know that if we do this in a unified fashion, some cities may be happy with what happens sooner rather than later, and others might not. But that's part of what this is. We're all in this together. And listen, we don't have boating in my community, but we've got golfing, where some folks on the east side have boating and they don't have golfing. So it's sort of going to be a process of, until we get back to whatever the new normal is, it's not going to be a panacea for everybody all at once.
Well, that was a note to end on, wasn't it?
Listen, we are all hopeful to do it as quickly as we can, but quick is going to be governed by Dr. Thatchy and others in the medical profession who are giving us counsel and information every day. And I think that's what we all need to rely upon, more than just saying date X is the day.
Well, we are really appreciative of your updates, and it's really great to hear that the cities are taking not only a practical approach, but as you said, really following health reports and reasons for how they make those decisions, which is a perfect segue into our next speaker, who will be providing a health report and hospital update, something which is always of interest to us. So at this time, I would like to welcome Dr. Thomas Macalusa. He is the Chief Quality and Patient Safety Officer for Memorial Healthcare System. Dr. Macalusa, please, welcome.
Well, thanks for having me again. I want to thank Mayor Sturmer for his leadership, and the comments he made are spot on. I know there are a lot of pressures to return things back to normal, to start to open up public spaces, open up businesses. But you're right, Mayor, that the virus doesn't follow the calendar. And there are public health principles that I think we can follow. And I thought I'd take the opportunity to speak to those in terms of how will we know when it's safe to begin reopening? And then what are some of the strategies that leaders, our public officials, as well as our business leaders can take to do this right and to prevent a rebound in cases that could happen if we're too fast and too aggressive. So some of you might be familiar with the roadmap to reopening. That's a document that's guided some of the efforts at the national level. It's published by the American Enterprise Institute. And they talk about phases of reopening. And according to those recommendations, we're really still in phase one, which is a strategy of stay at home, aggressive social distancing. What is it going to take for us to be able to move out from phase one? So there are really four things. And this is, if you hear these four things, you'll realize we really do have to be cautious and not be too aggressive in reopening. So one is a location or a region needs to see a sustained decline in the number of new cases over a 14-day period. So, it was mentioned earlier, there are about 28,000 cases. Well, let me back up. There are 28,000 cases in the state of Florida. Half of them are in Broward and Dade. Dade has about 8,000 cases roughly. Broward has 4,000. Actually, Broward has seen over the past maybe 6 or 7 days a decline in the number of new cases, whereas Dade really hasn't. Dade's been pretty flat. They even had a little bit of uptick a couple days ago. But certainly we've not seen those 14 days of steady decline. The other requirement is the availability of rapid testing, at the very least for all symptomatic patients, as well as their contacts. Now, early on, testing was really relegated to very strict criteria. It's begun to open up a bit. Our supply chains for testing equipment has been a little dicey. It does seem like it's getting better, but we still have not been testing enough people to really understand what's the prevalence of COVID-19 in the community. It was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of asymptomatic carriers of this virus, and that's one of the concerns for public health officials. Third, an adequately prepared healthcare system. I can say this, because we did not see the real severe uptick in cases that were anticipated, and I think we didn't because of the very strict social distancing that was put into place. Hospitals do have capacity to take care of patients. We are going to be seeing some of the patients who had delayed care coming back to us. But I think if things as they stand right now, we are all pretty comfortable. The one area we do have concerns about remains PPE, personal protective equipment, in particular N95 masks and gowns. The supply chain seemed to open up, then they tighten up again. And we are looking at, we need to be prepared for the future, not just for right now, but in the event of a spike or in the event of a resurgence in cases in the fall, we have to be prepared. So I think we are prepared right now, but again, that's going to take ongoing vigilance. The fourth issue, which was probably of most concern, that this is what would be required for us to be able to really reopen, is the public health system's capacity for contact tracing, meaning follow all positive cases, identify them, and identify their close personal contacts, test them, and have them self-quarantine. And right now, the public health departments are just not ramped up to do that. Now, I realize there are going to be some significant economic pressures, political pressures that may cause us to operate before all those four principles have been achieved. So what can public health officials and businesses do? So one is really risk assessment of specific locations. And what does that risk assessment look like? Well, one is you want to look at the potential for personal contacts in the space that you're considering opening, whether it's a beach, whether it's a golf course, whether it's a restaurant. And we talk about that contact intensity. What do I mean by that? Well, how close are those personal contacts, and what's the duration of that contact? So certainly on a golf course, you're going to be able to stay 6 feet apart, and the duration of that contact is probably pretty brief. Whereas in a bar or even on a beachfront, it may be very different in terms of that intensity. The other is the number of contacts. How many people are going to be in that business or public space at a particular time? The higher the number, the higher the risk. And then what ability do we have to modify those risk factors? To what degree can we modify the activities that go on there in order to reduce those risks? So those are sort of the assessment principles. And then you can, once you understand your risk, you can develop some other mitigation strategies. And I'll just talk about 4 high-level mitigation strategies. One we all know about, physical distancing. So even if we're going to open up a business, there is still opportunity for people to work at home. Here at the hospital and the healthcare system, as we look to perhaps begin to doing non-urgent cases or non-urgent services, we will likely still tell people in our business offices and our back offices to work from home. There's no need to have those people close to one another if it's avoidable. Then there are what I would call engineering controls. These are our ability to maybe create physical barriers. You see this in some of our stores now where they've put up the plexiglass at the cashier. So that's a way of mitigating some of those personal contact risks. Businesses and public officials can now also exert administrative controls, for example, technology to help facilitate communication. You can limit the number of the business hours or the number of customers that are allowed at a particular time. And then the issues with PPE, even in small businesses, it's going to be, I think, a reality in the future that we're going to be seeing the use of masks. I would say outside of healthcare, the use of non-medical grade cloth masks will continue to be part of society for some time, and again, to protect ourselves and to protect our community. I think, though, there's another reality, which is there's going to be a risk of an increasing number of cases. We're going to see an increasing number of cases for 2 reasons. One is we're going to be testing more people. If we test more people, we'll probably see more positive cases. That's why there's that importance of tracing those contacts. There is none of these mitigation strategies or risk assessments are perfect. And so we have seen the experience from other pandemics and in the current pandemic in other countries is when services open, we do see an influx of cases. And so business leaders, community leaders are going to have to really have the strength and commitment to make some difficult decisions down the line. It might be things like changing the rules again, closing some businesses. Hospitals will also have to be prepared and vigilant for this potential. So thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions about any of those issues.
Thank you so much, Dr. Macaluso. Your presentation actually covered a number of the questions that were being asked. It was really comprehensive and really kind of allowed you to draw conclusions about the facts that we're seeing. It was interesting to point out that regarding the 4 phases to determine readiness, that Broward has seen a sustained decline, so we're on a positive trajectory there, but our very close neighbor, Miami-Dade, has actually seen a spike within the past week. With that, we've heard about the approach of a very regional collaborative effort to be systematic in how things are opened. Do you think that that is the appropriate approach given the scenario?
Yeah, I think so. And it's important, though, to recognize by regional and sort of the nature of our society. It kind of goes back to the question about the 1918 pandemic. Obviously, societies move about now compared to 1918. In 1918, people still lived in cities and they lived there and they worked there. Obviously, it's very different here. We have, I know with Memorial, we have employees who live up in Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Miami-Dade. So that region does need to be defined broadly. The other point is, you know, as we said earlier, the virus doesn't follow the calendar. It also doesn't really follow the county borders. And so it does give us concern here in the Memorial Healthcare System, where we're in the south part of the county, that, you know, Dade's numbers are considerably higher, and you know, many of our patients are Dade County patients as well. So I do think that coordination among the counties across, among the leaders across the 4 counties is really going to be important.
Well, thank you so much for that. We appreciate that input, and we appreciate your leadership in this area.
You're welcome.
We're moving on now to our last presenter, and next up to provide the latest information about Broward County Public Schools is Superintendent Robert Runcie, who leads and runs the 2nd largest school district in the state and one of the largest in the country. Superintendent, please, we welcome you.
I know one of
great.
is that, oops, I'm sorry, what's that? Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. One of the takeaways I'm having from that is certainly how coordinated and collaborative our county is with all the organizations working together. As we all know, we can't open businesses and we can't open the county without opening schools. So what we're doing certainly is pretty vital in this conversation, so I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So I'll cover just a few things and give you an update and sense of where we are and how prepared we are as a system. So first I'll talk about distance learning and just tell you that Broward County has been building a platform and has developed a foundation that put us in a pretty good place prior to closing down and the pandemic on our doorsteps. We started several years ago to build a blended learning environment, which consists of a learning management system, which we call Canvas, secure authentication procedures for teachers and students, where they authenticate each day. They go into a virtual classroom where the teachers can see students and monitor them and issue assignments and engage kids. So the majority of our teachers were already using this method, which is something unique among school districts. We didn't have to go out at the last minute and cobble a bunch of things together and try to figure out how to make them work. With that said, our teachers have been doing an amazing job in this pivot as we've gone from classroom-based instruction to distance learning. About 90 daily attendance for students is around 91%. We've had about 98% of all students engaged, you know, since we've been back from spring break. But we know there's still some students out there who are disconnected or they're not engaging regularly. And we also have students in unstable home environments or have housing insecurity. So those students we certainly worry about, and we put a team of people together, including social workers, family counselors, and other administrators who are reaching out daily to make sure we're connecting with them. Whatever barriers are in the way, if it's technology or some other services they need, we're making sure that they receive that. I do want to certainly recognize for our parents in our community that this has been a heavy lift for many of them. You know, it's another burden that they have to take on while they're dealing with a lot of anxiety, stress, and uncertainty. Some of them trying to work at home and get engaged in this as well, especially for our youngest learners. So this is a journey that we're going on together, and I just want to acknowledge that parents are playing a pretty big role in this effort as well. Given the fact that in this district, about 63% of our students qualify for free and reduced meals, which is a proxy for poverty, we know being able to feed our families is pretty key. I think we've all seen the enormous lines that are emerging, not just in our county, but throughout this nation, and how essential that is. So we opened 51 sites, school sites, where parents can come and pick up food, no questions asked. We don't check for any credentials or whatever it is that we normally would do. So we are serving food daily at 51 sites. At the end of last week, we delivered 154,000 meals last week, over 400,000 meals since March 30th when we opened school. And so we've been seeing an increase every week between 20 and 30,000 additional meals per week. So our food service workers have been doing an outstanding job on the front line and figuring out how to make that work. Yesterday, we announced that we will go to a 2 times per week model instead of every day during the week. We'll have grab and go service for breakfast and lunch on Monday and Wednesday. What that does is reduce the number of trips for families, so they'll get multiple meals when they come. It reduces the number of trips, and it minimizes the number of days that our workers are out there as well. We're also working with an organization called Four Rivers. We'll make an announcement maybe by the end of the week, maybe by tomorrow or early next week, to work with local restaurants to prepare dinners and meals for families above and beyond the breakfast and lunch that we're doing. So that's something else that we are going to be able to bring to the table shortly. As far as connectivity, obviously very critical here. Some of you have already heard we have issued about 90,000 laptop computer devices out to our students. I think that's unprecedented nationally. And we are in a good position to be able to do that because we have been able to use capital dollars to reduce our student to computer ratio. For many years ago, it was around 6 to 1. Today, it's almost 1 to 1. So rather than having those assets sit in our buildings, we made sure that every student that needed technology, we would give it to them. And then there's also connectivity. We negotiated a couple deals, one with Comcast for $9.95 per month to support low-income families. The first 60 days are free. We recently did a similar arrangement with AT&T for $10 a month. We've also issued out about 3,000 free mobile hotspot devices to needy students in our district. And we're prepared to issue out another 2,000 to students who, again, are experiencing housing insecurity. They are having significant financial challenges. We know students who have now become the main breadwinner of the family because everyone is out of work. They may be working full-time in a grocery store. We need to give them the opportunities as well. So our goal is to make sure that there's no reason why any student would not be connected. So they're getting computers, they're getting connectivity, and we're making sure social workers, family counselors, and other folks are reaching out to them on a daily basis. Graduation ceremonies, we made our announcement yesterday after consultation with students, administrators, and staff. A lot of interest on that. Our class of 2020 is an amazing class of students. They've certainly been through a lot. Hurricanes, school tragedies, a constant shift in statewide assessments, very resilient group of kids. And now we're faced with this global pandemic. So we looked at everything we could do to be able to make this work and do it in a way that obviously is safe for our students and our staff. So we're going to go with a virtual graduation ceremony. Those ceremonies will occur during the month of June. They will be structured as much as possible to simulate the actual graduation ceremony. So there will be, color guard, the Pledge of Allegiance. There's presentations from the salutatorian, valedictorian, all the way down to the turning of the tassel. So we're going to try to make it memorable and personal, and introduce a lot of opportunities so that including the ability for all families and friends from all over the county or the world can certainly view it. We'll show it on Beacon TV, live stream to YouTube. So just going to do a lot of things to try to make it as good as possible. I've also indicated that we will be prepared should conditions change. We will work very quickly to execute on some alternative dates that we've already secured and venues have already been secured for late July and early August. Certainly we can't pull the trigger nor really plan on that because we would need to see what the doctor indicated, significant indicators that the situation has changed before we are able to have large gatherings. As you know, some of our high schools have as much as up to 1,000 students in a graduating class. So that's become available. The last thing I'll mention is the whole recovery process. First, I'll just, as everyone knows, Florida economy is pretty heavily dependent on tourism and related services like the hotel industry, dining. Of course, Disney is a big player in this state. They're closed and have furloughed 43,000 employees. And Florida depends a lot more on income taxes and has an older population more so than other states. So we have some vulnerability there. Even though we have a $3 billion fund balance in the state, it's expected that the impact is going to cost and exceed $8 billion. And that was in a report from Moody's last week. So we are anticipating that we could see as much of a cut as 25% to our education budgets, unless there is some significant federal infusion of dollars. So far, the most recent stimulus funding had allocated $30 billion for education. That included K-12 as well as higher ed. 17 billion of that was for K-12. Out of that, the state of Florida received 770 million to distribute. To put that into perspective, in 2008, during the last recession, about 100 billion was allocated to education. So, and we know that the financial and economic impact of this pandemic is significantly greater than that. So we have a ways to go before we could bridge the gap and provide funding for resources that we'll need to recover from this. The governor's also received an additional $117 million for emergency education relief. I will be having a conversation with the commissioner, really making the case that South Florida is unique in three aspects. One, as was stated earlier, we have the majority of COVID-19 cases. When you look at Palm Beach, Broward, and Dade, I believe counts for at least 60% of the cases in the state. So we're disproportionately impacted. Organizations like Broward Public Schools, we employ about 30,000 individuals, about 24,000 insured. We're self-insured, so we're certainly going to have a significant impact to healthcare costs as a result of this. We have a high proportion of English language learners, special needs students, also students impacted by poverty. And also, we believe that we're going to have an extended shutdown here in South Florida. We would be the last to reopen. So we're trying to really make that case to get a disproportionate, a higher proportion of the funding. The last thing I would say is that we're learning some really interesting lessons out of this. As they say, never waste a crisis. We believe that there's some significant opportunities to think about reinventing public education. There's certainly been some growing acceptance of virtual learning. So we're going to have to think about how do we redesign our schools to create more flexibility, more opportunities, leveraging technology and distance learning. So we're pretty excited about that, and we're going to be putting some internal think tanks with educators and administrators to try to figure what that might look like. With that said, I'll open it up for questions.
Well, thank you so much, Superintendent. We are out of time for questions, but I would like to tell you how much we appreciate the work that the district is doing for the free and reduced meals. 63% of your students qualifying, I mean, that's significant, so that's so important. And also about the success that you've been having with distance learning. So on behalf of the Alliance, I'd like to thank you and all our presenters for the tremendous insight and guidance that you have provided for us. And we know that we appreciate all your work during this very challenging time. And now to close, I would like to call on Bob Swindell, the President and CEO of the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance. I'd also like to say that Bob was just named to Governor DeSantis's Reopen Florida Task Force Industry Working Group, as has our own mayor, Broward County Mayor Dale Holness, who's also a member of the executive committee. And with that, Bob, please take us to close.
Thank you very much, Juliet, and my thanks to all the informative speakers today. In my opinion, these calls get better and better, and I hope this communication format is an efficient use of everyone's time. We had a high number of participants today, so the Alliance thanks you for that, and again, we hope that it's valuable for you. Our primary responsibility is growing jobs in Broward, and believe it or not, that work does continue still. In addition to our business presentation, I will tell you our brand, work in the cloud, live in the sun, has probably never gotten better than it does today. Broward County remains a great place to do business. And I'm also happy to report there continues to be strong interest in Broward County. We will actually be hosting a site visit next week on a potential corporate headquarters. So again, we'll be following all the appropriate physical distancing and hygiene protocols, but we are still working with folks that want to bring jobs to our community. We can't forget that that's still something that's an important responsibility of the Alliance. But we do know that the survival of our Broward businesses is our top priority, and we hope that things will begin to return to normalcy in May. And that people employed 3 to 4 weeks ago will get back to work and return to their jobs. I'd also like to say that Mayor Trantelis has convened a Mayor's Advisory Council. He's also a member of the Governor's Task Force to reopen Florida. And I'm sure the mayor will be working closely with key business leaders in Fort Lauderdale on ways to best reactivate our economy here in Fort Lauderdale, but using a lot of the information shared at the Governor's Task Force meetings. So quick update on that. As Juliet mentioned, we're proud that our executive committee member and mayor of Broward County, Dale Holness, has been asked by the governor to serve. The governor is asking Broward Florida business leaders to do what they do best, and that's plan for success, being innovative and being nimble to adjust as viral science research, healthcare experts provide new data about the contagion, and discover common denominators among asymptomatic biology and virus immunology. We are well represented by 18 of Broward's most successful business, healthcare, and education leaders serving on the governor's task force and different working committees. They're doing an incredible job of planning within their specific industries. For example, Tim Petrillo is working on the restaurants and hotels and is talking about the need for for a specific opening date, understanding that may change as science changes or information changes, as Dr. Maliki had talked about. But we need to have a point of planning that restaurants can work back from. And Tim has done some amazing work, not only within his own company, but sharing within his industry what restaurants and hotels will be doing in the future to ensure not only employee safety, but also patron safety. We want to restore confidence in everyone that they can go out and enjoy a well-prepared meal and feel safe and not worry about contracting the virus. We also have John Hage, who presented yesterday. He's the CEO of Charter Schools USA, and John presented on education in Florida and what some of the different education organizations around our state, including charter schools, are doing to assist students in this new virtual learning environment. Greg Hale, who's also an Alliance officer and is president of Broward College, presented to the governor's working group today on strategies to connect with our residents and skill development, and provide certifications that will improve their new job opportunities, especially going into our most distressed communities. The Alliance, through our program, is working with Broward College and working in 6 specific zip codes in Broward County. There's no doubt this disease is ravaging our economy, the health of our community, and our quality of life. We're going to be thoughtful and prepare for what comes after the devastation caused by the C-19 virus. I hope, again, that you found today's speakers knowledgeable. We will continue to seek out the best and the brightest to help you as business people plan for your business and what will be a part of your recovery strategy moving forward. I want to close by thanking our Alliance team for putting together today's call and assembling the speakers and the format. My best to all of you. Stay well. Thanks so much for being a part of today's call.